A blind man, a retired canine, and a biker's bad decision. What happened next stunned everyone. The sun shone brightly over Lincoln Park in San Antonio, Texas, casting long, warm rays over the manicured lawns and winding paths. The air carried a hint of freshly cut grass mixed with the scent of hot dogs and popcorn from a nearby vendor. It was the kind of day that drew people outdoors, the kind where strangers smiled in passing, and life's usual worries seemed a little less heavy. Children raced across the playground, their high-pitched laughter carrying over the gentle gurgle of the park's central fountain. Parents strolled hand in hand, stopping now and then to adjust a hat or take a quick photo. Joggers moved steadily along the paths, earbuds in sweat darkening the backs of their shirts. Dogs barked in the distance, chasing after frisbees or playfully tugging at leashes near the fountain. A man sat quietly on a wooden bench, his posture relaxed, his face tilted toward the warmth of the sun. His name was Terrence. He was a tall, lean man in his early 50s, his dark skin glowing in the sunlight. A pair of sunglasses shielded his unseeing eyes, and a white cane rested beside him. Its handle worn smooth from years of use by his side sat King, a German shepherd, with a sleek coat and an air of quiet confidence. King wasn't just a companion. He was Terrence's guide and protector, a living, breathing extension of his independence for those who frequented the park. Terrence and King were a familiar sight. They'd seen him navigate the paths with calm assurance, King leading the way with measured steps. Some admired the duo from afar, while others occasionally stopped to chat, captivated by Terrence's warm demeanor and King's impeccable discipline. Today, however, most people seemed content to leave them in peace, absorbed in their own leisurely activities. But peace is a fragile thing, easily shattered in the distance. The deep rumble of motorcycle engines broke the park's harmonious rhythm, growing louder with each passing second. Heads turned toward the parking lot as a group of 6 bikers roared in their chrome bikes glinting under the sun. They dismounted with practiced swagger, their heavy boots striking the pavement with an audible thud, clad in leather vests adorned with patches and slogans. The bikers drew attention wherever they went. Their laughter was loud, their presence magnetic yet unsettling as they strolled toward the central area of the park. Conversations began to hush, people instinctively moving out of their path. Even the dogs seemed to sense the shift, some barking nervously while others huddled closer to their owners. The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a grizzled beard and piercing eyes, scanned the park as if it were his personal domain. His gaze landed on Terrence and King. A smirk crept across his face, a subtle yet unmistakable sign of trouble brewing. Terrence, oblivious to the approaching group, remained seated, his hand resting gently on King's head. The German shepherd, however, was alert. His ears twitched, his sharp eyes tracking the bikers as they drew closer. King's body was still, but his presence was charged like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release. The bikers came to a halt near the benches, their loud banter cutting through the park's once gentle atmosphere. A few park-goers glanced nervously in their direction before hurriedly looking away, pretending to focus on their conversations or phones. But even as people tried to ignore them, it was impossible to miss the tension that had settled over the area. The leader of the bikers, now standing just a few feet from Terrence, turned to his friends and chuckled. "Check this out," he said, nodding toward the man and his dog. His tone was dripping with mockery, the kind that dared someone to challenge him. Terrence didn't react, his face still turned toward the sun, his expression peaceful, but King's ears pinned back slightly, his gaze narrowing. He could sense the change, the brewing conflict that his owner couldn't see. And as the bikers' laughter echoed through the park, it was clear to anyone paying attention that this was no ordinary afternoon. Trouble was coming, and it was heading straight for Terrence. And King Terrence had always been a man of quiet strength, a trait forged through years of challenges that would have broken most people. Losing his sight in his mid-30s after a devastating car accident was a turning point in his life, but not one that defined it. Instead, it became the moment he chose to adapt, to persevere, and to live with purpose. Navigating a world built for sighted people wasn't easy. Terrence had faced his share of obstacles, from simple inconveniences to blatant moments of discrimination. But through it all, he carried himself with dignity. He was the kind of person who turned heads not because of his blindness, but because of the calm confidence he exuded. His guide dog King had become his anchor in this new chapter of life. A retired canine king wasn't just a service animal. The bartender finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Tank, don't push it. You don't know who you're messing with," but it was too late. Tank's ego had taken the wheel and he wasn't about to let go, as Tank's laughter echoed through the bar. The old man took a step forward, his presence suddenly seeming much larger than his frame. The bikers weren't laughing anymore. The room felt heavier, now the tension rippling outward with every second of silence. The old man stood still, his weathered face unreadable. But something in his eyes shifted, a glint of authority, a flicker of something dangerous. For the first time, Tank's grin faltered. If only for a moment. Still, he wasn't about to back down in front of his crew. "Take a seat," Old Man Tank said, forcing a laugh to mask his discomfort. He waved the cap again, this time dangling it mockingly in front of the old man. "Like bait. You're not scaring anyone with that tough guy act." The old man didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer, his movements calm but deliberate, as if sizing Tank up. The noise in the bar had dwindled to nothing now. Everyone watching with wide eyes, unsure what was about to unfold. Charlie the bartender had stopped polishing glasses. "Tank," he said again, more forcefully this time, "give it back now." But Tank ignored him, turning his attention back to the man in front of him. "You gonna make me pops, is that it?" The old man's voice was quiet, steady. "I've faced men twice your size with more bark and sharper teeth," he said, locking eyes with Tank. "You don't scare me, son. But you should be careful who you challenge. You never know who they are." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. One of the younger bikers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others for reassurance. The group had come in looking for a good time. But this wasn't the easy prey they'd expected. Tank laughed again, louder this time, as though he could drown out the uneasy silence that had settled around him. "Look at this guy trying to talk big," he said, turning to his crew. "What do you think? Should I give Grandpa his hat back?" "Yeah, give it back," one of the younger bikers muttered, barely audible. He wasn't smiling anymore, but Tank wasn't ready to let it go. He stepped closer, towering over the old man, and jabbed a finger at his chest. "Tell me, Pops, what makes you so special? You think wearing this hat gives you some kind of free pass?" The old man didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying Tank like he was trying to decide whether he was worth the trouble. Then he spoke, his voice low but firm. "That hat represents a lifetime of service, something you wouldn't understand." Tank opened his mouth to respond. But before he could, Charlie stepped out from behind the bar. He wasn't a small man, and the authority in his stride was enough to make even Tank hesitate. "That's enough," Charlie said, his voice hard as steel. "You're about to cross a line you can't come back from." Tank rolled his eyes, but before he could protest, Charlie added, "You have no idea who this man is." "Do you?" The room went dead silent. Even Tank froze, his bravado flickering for the first time. Charlie's words cut through the tension like a blade, and all eyes turned to the bartender as he stepped closer, ready to share a truth that would change everything. Charlie stood between the bikers and the old man, his expression dark with warning. "You idiots really don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice low but sharp. He pointed at the cap Tank still held now, limp in his hand. "That's not just any military hat. That belongs to Lieutenant General Raymond Ray Harris, Vietnam. Gulf War Black Ops. You're standing in front of one of the most decorated war heroes this country has ever known." The room seemed to shrink under the weight of Charlie's words. The bikers stared at him, blinking as if they hadn't heard correctly. Tank's grin finally slipped away, replaced with a confused scowl. "You're joking," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Charlie folded his arms, his gaze unflinching. "I've seen the man on TV. I've read about him in history books. Hell, he's even got a plaque hanging at the VFW down the road, and let me tell you, he's not the kind of man you want to piss off." The old man, General Harris, hadn't moved. He stood quietly, his gaze fixed on Tank, his hands steady at his sides. "Charlie," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you don't need to do this." But Charlie ignored him. He took a step closer to Tank, his voice growing colder. This man has seen things you can't even imagine while you're here playing tough guy. He's fought wars, LED men, and done things most of us wouldn't survive if he wanted to. He could take you apart without breaking a sweat. The bikers exchanged nervous glances. Even the youngest among them, who had been snickering just moments ago, looked visibly uneasy. Tank swallowed hard, his bravado wavering, but he wasn't ready to let go of his pride. How do you know? He's not just some old guy spinning war stories, he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual edge. Charlie didn't flinch because I served under him. He said, his voice like steel, 20 years ago in the Gulf. He saved my life and a dozen others in a firefight we weren't supposed to make it out of, and trust me, you don't forget a man like that. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were on the old man now, who finally stepped forward, taking back his hat from Tank's trembling hand. He adjusted it carefully, smoothing the worn brim before meeting Tank's gaze. You've had your fun. General Harris said, his voice calm but firm. Now sit down, finish your drinks, and let this be the end of it. For a moment, it seemed like Tank might argue. His jaw worked and his fists clenched at his sides. But the weight of the room, the eyes of the crowd, the bartender's unflinching stance, and the quiet authority radiating from the old man was too much. Tank stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. Fine, he muttered, his voice barely audible. No harm done, right? Harris didn't respond. He simply turned and sat back down, his glass of whiskey waiting for him. But the tension hadn't fully eased, and as the bikers shuffled back to their table, General Harris did something unexpected. He spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room once more. The old man's voice broke the silence like a sharp knife cutting through heavy air. You boys think the world owes you something. General Harris began, his tone steady, but there was a hard edge beneath it. He didn't look at the bikers directly, but his words were meant for them, and everyone in the room knew it. Tank and his crew froze their beers untouched. The other patrons leaned in slightly, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. Even Charlie, who had retreated behind the bar, stopped mid-motion, his eyes locked on Harris. I've seen men like you before. Harris continued, tilting his glass thoughtfully. Men who think strength comes from the size of their muscles or how loud they can shout. But real strength, that's something else entirely. He set his glass down, the clink echoing louder than it should have. I was 19 when I learned what real strength looks like, fresh out of basic, thrown into the jungles of Vietnam. No amount of training prepares you for that. For the heat, the fear, the noise, or the silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if the next step you take will be your last. The room was silent now, all ears tuned to the old man's words. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. There was this mission, a rescue op. 2 of our guys were pinned down, surrounded by enemy fire command, told us it was a suicide run, but we went anyway. Not because we wanted to be heroes. No one thinks about medals in moments like that, but because leaving them behind wasn't an option. His eyes grew distant, as if he could still see the jungle in his mind. We lost 2 men that day. Good men. But we brought those boys home. I still see their faces sometimes. Those we lost and those we saved. And every time I do, I remind myself that real strength isn't about what you take, it's about what you're willing to give. The bikers sat frozen, their earlier swagger completely gone. Even Tank, who had seemed untouchable just moments ago, was staring at the table, his jaw tight, but his hands trembling slightly. Harris continued, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. I've carried men out of burning vehicles, patched up wounds with my bare hands, and held brothers while they took their last breaths. I fought for this country, for the freedoms you enjoy without a second thought. And what do you do with that freedom? Come into a bar and harass an old man who's just trying to enjoy a drink. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over the bikers. You think that makes you tough, son? You don't know the first thing about tough. The room was utterly still. Even the jukebox seemed to have gone quiet, its usual hum replaced by a suffocating silence. Harris took a deep breath, the weight of his memories pressing down on him, but his face remained calm, resolute. You don't have to prove you're strong by tearing someone else down. he said finally. Real strength is in lifting others up, even when it costs you something. The weight of Harris's words hung in the air, and for the first time that night, the bikers looked more like boys who'd been caught doing something shameful. The crowd waited, breaths held to see how they'd respond. The bikers sat motionless, their earlier bravado reduced to an uncomfortable silence. Tank, the leader who had filled the room with his booming voice and cocky grin, now stared at the table, avoiding Harris's piercing gaze. The other members of the crew fidgeted, shifting in their seats, as if the weight of the old man's words was too much to bear. The crowd watched them closely, their expressions ranging from quiet satisfaction to hesitant concern. Charlie the bartender leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting to see how this moment would play out. Finally, Tank broke the silence. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh and awkward in the still room. He struggled to find words, his usual confidence completely gone. I didn't know. All right, I didn't know who you were. Harris didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at Tank, his calm, unwavering gaze, forcing the biker to confront his shame head-on. I mean it, Tank, continued, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. We were just messing around, I didn't mean any disrespect. One of the younger bikers, the one who had laughed the loudest earlier, finally spoke up, his voice trembling. We're sorry, sir. We didn't know. Harris leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. You shouldn't need to know someone's story to treat them with respect. He said, his tone firm, but not unkind. Every person you meet has been through battles. You can't see some carry those scars on the outside. Others carry them within. Either way, it cost you nothing to show decency. The younger biker nodded quickly, his face red with embarrassment. Yes, sir. You're right, I'm sorry. Tank looked up, finally meeting Harris's eyes. I'm sorry too. He said, the words sounding foreign coming from his mouth. He hesitated, then stood extending his hand toward the old man. Thank you for your service and for reminding us what really matters. Harris studied him for a moment, then took the offered hand. His grip firm, but not forceful. Apology accepted, he said. But remember this moment. Don't let it fade once you leave this place. Tank nodded, his face solemn. We won't forget, he said, and for the first time there was sincerity in his voice. The other bikers mumbled their apologies as well, their voices subdued but genuine. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. The patrons returned to their conversations in hushed tones, the weight of the moment lingering, but no longer oppressive. Charlie stepped forward, clapping Tank on the shoulder. Smart move, son, he said gruffly. Now, why don't you boys finish your beers and call it a night? The bikers nodded, retreating to their table without another word. They sat quietly, their earlier rowdiness replaced by reflective silence. Harris picked up his whiskey, taking a slow sip as he gazed out the window. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence alone was enough to leave an indelible mark on everyone in the room as the night returned to its usual rhythm. The patrons of Mac's Roadhouse were left with a story they'd never forget, and a lesson that would stick with them long after the old man had gone. The night at Max's Roadhouse slowly resumed its usual rhythm, but the air carried a different weight now. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. People glanced toward the corner where General Harris sat, their eyes filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. The bikers remained subdued, their beers untouched as they exchanged quiet words among themselves. Tank, usually the loudest and most confident, seemed lost in thought. He occasionally glanced toward the old man, his expression unreadable, but it was clear that the encounter had shaken him deeply. General Harris finished his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light as he set the empty glass down. He stood up, his movements slow but deliberate, and adjusted his cap. The bar's patrons watched him, their gazes filled with unspoken respect. Harris didn't acknowledge the attention. He simply turned to Charlie and gave him a small nod. Charlie nodded back, his gruff exterior softening for a moment. Take care of yourself, General, he said quietly. Harris turned toward the door, his steps measured and steady. Just as he reached the threshold, he paused and looked over his shoulder. His voice carried across the room, strong but calm. Remember, respect doesn't cost you anything, but the lack of it might. With that, he pushed the door open and walked out into the cool night, leaving the bar in thoughtful silence. Tank watched him leave, his jaw clenched, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he turned back to his crew. "We've got some work to do," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Can't be the men we were tonight." The younger biker nodded solemnly. "Yeah, we can do better." The rest of the crew murmured their agreement, a quiet but meaningful shift in their attitudes. They weren't the same men who had walked in earlier, and it was clear they wouldn't forget this night anytime soon. Back inside the bar, Charlie picked up Harris's empty glass, holding it for a moment before placing it gently into the sink. "That's the kind of man who reminds you what honor looks like," he said almost to himself. The patrons slowly returned to their conversations, but the energy in the room was different. Now less rowdy, more reflective people shared knowing glances, the weight of Harris's words and presence lingering like an invisible reminder. Outside, the old man walked toward his car, the stars shining bright above him. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had spent a lifetime teaching lessons through action, and tonight had been no different. He knew that respect and humility weren't just taught. They were earned, and he hoped the bikers would carry that lesson with them. Stories like these remind us of the power of respect, humility, and the unseen battles others have fought. Share this story if it moved you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tales that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the strength in humanity.